if your glue is the coworker that went on vacation and you're the hamstring and you had to take over their workload, when they come back from vacation, you want to give them their workload back. So, but
These
if they,
analogies are amazing.
I use them all the time because it makes,
Helps people
are
understand.
like,
We need
yeah.
a whole episode of just Maggie analogies. These are
we do.
perfect.
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah. Okay.
Time to armor up and level out. Listen up and hear what we're about.
Welcome back to Armor Radio. Josh here with Dusty.
Hey man, how you doing?
Good, man. You?
I'm good.
Back with Maggie Ward for her second time on the podcast.
Most
Maggie.
watched.
Yeah, it is. It is our most viewed,
Was
most
that our first
listened
YouTube,
to.
Is that the first one
No.
that we recorded on like camera?
Oh,
It might have been.
it was on phone still. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had somebody's phone set up.
Oh
Yeah.
Well, it was on phone until the last episode.
Oh.
That's very true. Episode 12. So if you want to review that, you can go back and listen to. My gosh, there was a lot of topics
Yeah,
that
there
we
was.
covered. We stayed kind of broad with some things. We got a deep dive into a couple things, and we got a little bit to talk about today. And I think the first topic that I wanted to get into was some of the myths, maybe, about massage.
Oh boy.
And you can just, cut me short. Tell me when we're getting into some weird territory that you don't want to talk
We
about.
can address it. It's okay.
Let's talk about the lymphatic system.
Okay.
What can you tell us what first off, is it a thing?
Yes.
Because I seem to find some literature that says it's not, or that it's not worth anything, or that it's something we shouldn't pay attention to. And then can you tell me for our listeners what it is?
Okay, so your lymphatic system is it's a bodily system that you learn, obviously, like with anatomy. It's one of the 10 or 12, I don't know, off the top of my head. It's another fluid. It's not your blood. It's not your cerebral fluid. It's your first line of defense against pathologies. It's what helps kind of clean your body of all of the toxins and all of that kind of stuff. It's also like when you swell, when you get hurt, things like that. That's kind of your first line of defense. That's where all those cells, your A or your B and T cells sit, and they go in and attack all that fun stuff. If you have anything that comes in, whether you get sick, that's why your sinuses, and you can you feel here? You feel your swollen lymph nodes, all that fun stuff.
Okay.
That's, I think, probably one of the best things that says that it is real is you get swollen right there, especially when you're sick. So I would go ahead and be like, whatever literature that says is weird.
So is swelling then bad?
No.
No.
I see this a lot with the ice baths. I know people want to do it right after your workout, and there's a lot of stuff that says you shouldn't, because you need that swelling post-workout for your body to heal. So swelling is not necessarily always bad. It's bad if it's chronic, because then that just says that something's wrong. But swelling is not necessarily bad because that's your first line of defense, and that's how your body knows that's how you also know that something is wrong. So when you bust up your knee and that swelling happens, that's where the healing process happens. But if it stays swollen, then you know that something's probably not working properly, or your body needs some help.
So you're in the
no.
camp that says if I've done something and something swells, I twist my ankle, and then my ankle swells up, I'm not rushing to ice to immediately fix that. You'd say that would be bad.
You're more movement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. There's a study that's come out now that the rice method is not a good idea. So we've believed that for the last probably 20, 25 plus years. Since that study came out, and they've basically, the guy who wrote the study has come back and said that is not right. He's now I can't remember what the acronym is, but basically movement and making sure that you're getting some blood flow in there and your lymphatic system can get in there and help it to heal, and not just propping it up and resting and icing it now. So
Okay, so if the let's say the circulatory system, your heart is your pump. So the lymphatic system is movement, the pump?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so
What am I trying to pump? Am I trying to work the swelling away from where it's swollen through movement? What am I trying to do there? And where does it go?
So they feed off of is correlated, I guess is a good word, with like your circulatory system, with like
Yeah.
bloods, veins, arteries, all that stuff. So like the movement of that helps. So like jumping is a good one to get it moving. Any type of like calf raise gets that
Vibration
from,
plate.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, any type of movement, and like when I work any type of lymphatic stuff in sessions, they teach you how to like pump it. So you'll pump all the major sites where all the drains are, drains it back into just the lymphatic system in general, so that it can like circulate through, and then it can get rid of all the
Okay, so
nasty stuff.
tell me about that. Yeah.
The drains are like, oh my gosh, the main ones are like your collarbones. That's like head and neck. They drain here, and then the rest of your body kind of comes up into your hips. So like when I pump, you pump like the main ones are like in the hips, and then I pump like collarbones. So those are like the main like your 4-way intersections, and everything else is like your 2-lane roads.
Okay, so like let's go back to the knee that you talked about. I bust up my knee and it's swollen. You're gonna pump. How does that work? Like I come to you and you do what?
You're gonna work on my hips, even though I've injured my knee.
Yeah. So like let's say, so I have a client who she actually has a swollen knee. Doesn't really know what it's from, but it's a chronic thing. So I told her, I was like, hey, if we want to do some actual like muscle work, that's totally cool. I said, however, we're going to do some lymphatic stuff too, because we need to get some of that swelling down. So what I would do first is we pumped like kind of in this hip crease, which is where those kind of drains and stuff are. We pumped here, and literally all you have to do is just you just pump it real quick, It just gets enough movement in those areas with the drains to where like you don't think like, when do you ever move that area? Usually just in like hip flexion or hip extension. But if you're just sitting all day, it's not going to move.
Is it right up above the hip?
Yeah, I usually come to like the hip bone, and then kind of come just kind of down inside and just kind of around there.
What would you see? Like if you had you had the swollen knee, and then you start doing like what you're talking about, where there's we could talk about the difference between that and manual therapy, but what do you see happen? Does it immediately relieve swelling?
No.
No? Okay.
So the pumping just kind of, it like, if you think about it, like your toilet is clogged, if you have to unclog it first, and then you can flush the toilet.
Plunge.
So like, yeah, you have plunge it first, and then we do some lymphatic work, which is just super light. You're basically just gripping the skin and like moving the fluid, because that lymphatic, everything just sits kind of in your skin. It's not like super deep into that muscle. So it's super light, and we're just basically like moving. I think about just literally like you're moving fluid. Like if you put a sticker on your car and there's a bubble under it, and you're just kind of trying to get that bubble out. That's kind of what I think about is happening, as far as like my pressure and the movement goes.
Okay.
And then we just keep doing that. We just try to like think about dispersing that fluid, that bubble in the sticker on your knee, and just trying to like get that bubble out is kind of just how I think about it.
Yeah.
And then, you can see it. Sometimes it kind of just depends on the person, like how quickly you will see it kind of disperse. Like with her, she woke up the next morning, that client that I have, she woke up the next morning and she was like, the swelling is like dramatically decreased.
Okay.
And your body can work quickly with that too. It's like, if you ice something, like people who have iced their ankle and the swelling goes down. So it's like, your body can move it pretty quick.
Now we're looking at that we're trying to restore movement pattern. Obviously, we want to get them back to whatever they consider their normal life or normal performance. Do you then, after you've done that, after you've treated, is it best, if possible, to go and move the thing? Like, would it be good to go work out after? Or would it be good to rest after? Would it be good to just walk? Is there a specific thing that you have athletes do?
No, I'm not like super. With the lymphatic system, you can go to like an extra year of school for this. Like you can go super deep into it. I personally just haven't done that. I would say like move within, the confines of what's comfortable.
Okay.
So like, if you're a high level athlete and you need to go practice after, I would just be like, obviously talk to whoever you need to, but be cautious of that, be aware of that. But like with her, I was like, if you want to go walk on a treadmill, or if you want to do some just like light body weight squats or like whatever, just kind of get it moving, and see how it feels too, then that's totally fine. But I personally, yes, I would say like at least walk around.
Okay.
Just to, again, get some movement, see how it feels. And now because you also have to kind of retrain your brain of like, this is going to feel different, especially if you've dealt with that swelling for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to also kind of like retrain your brain of like, hey, this is normal. This is what we want.
Yeah.
So
Is this
I would
the
say
same
yes.
premise as like a kinesio tape or like a rock tape kind of thing? Like if I remember right, it was meant to separate the skin and lymphatic system and then let metabolic waste travel quickly or rid more often. Is that the same kind of deal?
Yeah, that's kind of the goal
Okay.
of that too. So it's super similar. That's
Okay.
kind of their goal, and they're also like, in addition to that, also making sure that you have kind of that range of motion too to like restore the movement pattern. So it's
Okay.
kind of that's the premise of like doing both, I guess. Yeah.
When people say things like get rid of toxins, is this
boy.
kind of what they mean? Is this kind of what we're talking about?
I think so. That's like a super old, just like generic massage thing.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, especially with any type of therapist that would like elbow deep in your back and they're like, oh, we're just getting rid of the toxins. It's like, I mean, no, technically, I would say massage and like lymphatic work plus the movement that you do after of like kind of what we just talked about, I think would make that statement valid, but like massage alone, just getting rid of toxins is not valid.
Okay.
Unless if you wanted to classify lymphatic work, then maybe, but not really, in
Okay.
my opinion.
Okay. Is the same thing that we're talking about, like getting rid of toxins, just the word that people use because they really don't know?
Yeah, I think so. I
Okay.
think they like, I don't know where that even honestly came from. I think it's the fact that like people get super like thirsty and like tired and maybe they have to like pee after, and I think that they just like
I think they're
assume.
flushing, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and flush was like another word that's used a lot of like, oh, we're just flushing everything out. It's like, yes and no, I guess. I would personally think no, unless you are like very intentional about doing the lymphatic work.
Okay.
But even then, it's like you're not really flushing anything out of like your body. Like if you were to go pee after a massage, there's not going to be like all these random chemicals coming out.
Yeah.
You'd have to.
That would probably be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That'd be
okay,
weird.
okay.
So.
What's the difference between massage and manual therapy?
I would say intention, number one, intention of like the therapist and kind of like what everybody is on the same page about. In my opinion, it's like massage, I feel like is more of a general term, which I personally use massage as like when I'm talking to clients anyways, just because in their head that is, they don't like, you say manual therapy and they're kind of like, what does that mean? I don't understand what you're talking about. So I just, even though mine's more like manual and can be more like sports related, it's, if you say manual therapy, they're like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about? So I always just say massage, and I think a lot of people think of massage too, even as just like a spa type thing,
Yeah.
which is totally fine. You know, at that point, it just becomes my job to educate you a little bit more of like, if you need something more, then we're going to do something more. Like if you're actually in chronic or even acute pain, and we need to like do some different things, whether it's lymphatic work or muscle testing or just some active stuff, then we need to do that. But, you know, if you're just coming to relax, that's totally fine too. And that's, again, under the same umbrella as manual therapy with massage too. I also think that manual therapy is just more involved, I guess is a better word.
Okay.
Like the client, you as the client, we're going to be moving around. We might do some cupping, some scraping, you know, there's going to be some more education to it. Whereas just a massage, I feel like, you know, I come in and I do all the work, which is totally fine.
Okay.
So that's just my opinion about the differences.
It's a little bit more, the client has a role, they play a part in the session as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
100%.
And you're relying on feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
You said last time that one of the things you liked the most in our previous chat was to get people out of pain.
Yeah.
You also said, though, that a lot of athletes that you see have no core, and I think it was something towards that exact words that you used. It was we talked a
Yeah.
lot about the psoas,
Yeah.
and maybe the stability about the core.
Yeah.
Would you put those two together to say something like, we didn't get into this the last time, but that people are in pain, maybe, and it could be shoulder pain, could be knee pain, could be, or either more vulnerable because of the core and their lack of strength?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So if I come into a session and somebody is having like shoulder or hip or both or even ankle, like I'm always like, hey, you know, do you, number one, have any injuries or surgeries around the core? Like, have you had a baby? Have you had any type of like cut, surgery, whatever, anywhere in like here? And
Why is that? I don't want to interrupt you, but why
Yeah,
is that the question that you go to off of that? Does that have to do with like the fascia?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So if you think about like a C-section, I deal with this one all the time. If you think about a C-section, it can either be traumatic, which adds a whole nother layer.
Yeah.
But you're cutting through so many different things just to pull this baby out. And it's not, we weren't designed to have that happen. So you're cutting through fascia, muscle tissue, arteries, all these different things that now your body has to relearn how to use. So that's a big one. I'm like, especially if your C-section scars are this long all the way across, some people would say they don't even have feeling there. So it's like, if you don't even have feeling to the touch, how can you accurately activate all the surrounding tissues?
Mm-hmm.
So at that point now, if you don't have service to that, then how can you call somebody? So if you can't call on your core to help with a deadlift because you had a baby, because you don't have service there, it's like, what else is going to have to compensate? Hips, low back, shoulders, even like neck, the whole nine. So everybody else is going to have to compensate just because you don't have service to these couple muscles.
Yeah.
So I always ask about that of like, if you don't have service there and you have to call on everybody else to help, and their main job isn't to help you stabilize, their job is to, extend or flex or whatever, then they're going to be pissed when they have to stabilize.
Mm.
They're going to be like, that is not in my job description. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a good way
So
to put it.
then pain is going to go everywhere else. So it's like, if you don't have the central guys online, like if your CEO's not there, then everybody else is like, what are we supposed to be doing? Like, we have to take up this slack
That's
too.
a good way to put that.
Dude,
Yeah.
Maggie's word pictures are like on point.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
My
So,
analogies,
I
I've
totally
had to,
can see that.
had
Yeah,
to pick them
totally
up.
can see that.
How often do you bump into it with clients where, like, particularly females who've had C-sections, but maybe they're like, 6, 8, 10 years down the road,
Yeah.
and like they've dealt with these things but never ever been able to completely connect the dots? Because
Yeah.
I know, just on the training side, I know how many times I've bumped into it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's off the radar because it's been so long, but
Yeah.
then you start kind of backtracking and it comes down to
Yeah.
like, oh man, this all stemmed from
Yeah.
the C-section.
Yeah, I think I do run into it pretty regularly.
Yeah.
I think it's usually with the women whose kids are 15 plus, because at that, they were like, oh, C-section, that's great. I don't have to give birth. I don't have an epidural. Like, I don't have to do anything. I got induced. Whereas, like, I feel like this generation of moms is becoming more crunchy.
Yeah.
So we're learning all of these different things and like how your body's actually supposed to do this and like why that's so bad, and like even the foods we get into and all that stuff. So I feel like, when I ask those questions of like, oh, your hip hurts, what about, have you had kids, like, do you have a C-section scar? They're like, oh yeah. They're like, I've always kind of wondered because this pain happened after I had kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, let's look at it. And they're like, I've always kind of wondered that. Whereas like, the moms with 15-year-old kids plus, they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So what's the first course of action? So you have somebody that comes to you and they present all of that sort of background. I can't feel, or I can't, I'm not as good at the analogy that you have, but the workers aren't doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So what do
CEO's
you-
not
Yeah.
present.
Yeah, what do you
Yeah.
do? Like they can move, but
Yeah.
they're in pain. You've seen that they have a C-section.
Yeah.
What do you do from there? What's the first step?
My first step is doing some muscle testing. So I have like a protocol that we go through. So we'll test, your rec abs, your TVA, psoas, and then QLs and some of your erectors. Erectors and your transverse abs are super big because those are, flex and extend of just your whole trunk in general.
And they're probably even more profound in that circumstance because they're compensating, like you said.
100%, yeah.
Okay.
So usually there will at least be like one or two there's no service, and then
What's that like? Is that like a push and then Dusty just all of a sudden he just folds?
sometimes,
like kind of thing?
yeah,
Okay.
sometimes, because it's a super light muscle test. It's not like we're not testing a strength thing, so it's going to be super light. And I tell them that too. And usually it will either be like they will start laughing because they're like, I don't have the strength to do that.
By light, do you mean, is this one of those things almost like a breathing, like a pelvic floor? Like you need to be able to turn the muscle on, but not get it 100% toned out?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of like when you're just warming up. I always explain like to my athletes in the gym, especially, it's like when you're warming up and you don't necessarily want to like load it just yet. You're just kind of seeing like, oh, can I feel that muscle turn on? It's kind of like that. And like, if they do push too hard, I'm always like, hey, like, especially with any type of core stuff, you'll have your other compensators come in. And so it's like, I'm not trying to see if you have the strength. Like, I want to see if that muscle can turn on, because if you have the strength to do it, but you don't have the signal, then you're having your other helpers come in. Mm-hmm. And we don't want that. We want to just check to see if they're doing their job. That one specific muscle's doing its job. Whereas like, if you're full on strength out with this muscle test, you're having everybody else come in and help. So it's like if we're doing like a hip extension and your glute can't fire, your hamstring's gonna come in and help. So I don't want that. So I just want a lighter push just to see if that glute can activate. If it can't, then I can move you a little bit.
So this is sort of another way to put this would be like if you hand somebody like a PVC pipe to be able to practice something in there. I can't feel it. I don't know what's going on. Then you give them loading. And they're like, okay, now I get it. But the whole point of it is you want to be able to do it on your own, not have to load them up where other muscles can help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like if you do a movement and, you're supposed to feel that, like, I just love to use a glute bridge kind of thing. Like, if you don't, like, if you're just doing bodyweight glute bridge and all you feel is hamstrings, then maybe we need to play with your feet a little bit. Maybe we need to do something else. Yeah. But the moment you put a bar on it, then you feel your glutes, it's kind of like, okay, your hamstrings are probably tired now, so your glutes are now having to kick in. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's probably an imbalance somewhere in there, which may not be detrimental, but at some point, like, it might cause other issues down the road or whatever. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like we want to make sure that the original muscle we're trying to test is online.
So for our listeners, going off of what you said, they failed the test. What's the first prescription? Is it, so let's say it was something like that. Do you try yourself multiple times through the day? Is it like a 10-by prescription where it's like try to get this to click as often as you can every hour? Or is it something like go into the gym and do this one exercise? Like what do you do from there?
So from there, like if I find something that doesn't have any service, I'll see why, like especially if there's a pain point involved, like if there's something you can't do a hip extension and then your glute is not firing at all, then there's something wrong. So I'll find, usually the guy that is compensating and then fix it. And that, if we find that, then it's usually a release activate. So it's like, let's say your hamstring was the problem and like, that's why your glute can't fire. I'll tell you to stretch your hamstring and then activate the glute. So that way we can kind of like balance out the workload between the two. The analogy I always use is like, if your glute is the coworker that went on vacation and you're the hamstring and you had to take over their workload, when they come back from vacation, you want to give them their workload back. So, but
these analogies are amazing.
I use them all the time because it makes,
helps people understand.
Like,
we need a whole episode of just Maggie analogies. These are
we
perfect.
do.
Yeah,
we do.
Yeah. Okay. But last time we were talking, you talked about stretching in a less than favorable way most of the time. So when you say stretching, can you tell me about how you mean? Because just to let our listeners know, the last time, it was generally speaking, something feels a certain way. It feels tight, which is more of a perception. So then we stretch it, which it probably needed to be strengthened, which is why it felt tight in the first place. And that's what we talked about the last time.
Yeah.
But why would you have them stretch a hamstring and then do an exercise to engage the glute? Is that just because the hamstring was the thing that was toned out? So you're trying to turn it off?
Yeah, pretty much. So that's just like the specific protocol. So like you don't necessarily even have to stretch it. Like you could foam roll it, you could take a lacrosse ball, whatever, to basically turn down the signal, so that we can turn up the signal on the glute or whatever was not wanting to fire properly. Okay. So I'm not a huge component or huge advocate for stretching just by itself. Because usually people will stretch the things that need to be strengthened, like hamstrings, low back, or like whatever.
So hip flexor.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I'm not a huge component for that, but in that case of like, there are some muscles that if I find that something is being compensated for and like, you just can't really like foam roll it, like your low back, like your QL, you can't really foam roll that. You can kind of get a lacrosse ball in there, but like it's so much easier to just stretch it to turn the signal down. but that's why I'm always like, you need to do the strengthening exercise like right after. So with that, of like
So with the QL, would that be a side carry?
If you want to strengthen it, yeah.
Okay.
If you want to stretch it, you just kind of like lean over to the side. Yeah.
Are there any other musculature that you think works well like that? So if you have the QL one, that getting a ball or getting something into or not doing that, like are there other muscles that work like that you've seen? That work better with like a stretch as opposed to manual therapy?
Yeah, psoas for sure.
Okay.
You don't often find that one to be overworking. Usually it needs to be strengthened.
Can people get to that on their own? There seems to be a lot of contention whether you can actually get to it because it's on your back.
Yeah.
If you're laying on something on your front, are you
Yeah.
even actually getting there, or are you just pushing in the midline tissue? What's your belief?
I personally believe that you can't really. I mean, I've released some people's psoases before.
But you as a therapist, though, you can get your hand in. You know what you're going for. It's a lot different than.
I still think that I can't even get to it.
Okay.
So like, because I mean, you think about all the tissue you got to push through and like organs and all that fun stuff. It's like, like you'd have to have some real. I mean, I know some male therapists that could probably get there, but even then, it's like, you got obliques, you got all the core muscles to go through, and like all that stuff. So
then talk to me about this. When you have that athlete that comes in and they're responsive or they're whatever it is, and then you have them do a right or whatever it may be, a meat grinder on their psoas, and then they feel better. Is it the midline tissue that they're sort of busting up, or is it just the effect of the touch that makes them immediately feel better?
Yeah, it could be both. It could be like maybe they've got like an internal or external oblique issue that's going on. You see that a lot with any type of like rotation, which is most athletes. There could be like an imbalance with that, or it could be just a proprioception thing. Like maybe they just needed because that's the same thing with stretching of like, you can stretch your hamstrings and they feel good for a couple hours and then that comes right back.
Is the thing, if me stretching the thing feels good and then me having to stretch the thing all the time, does that mean that I'm doing nothing, or does that mean that I could just keep stretching the thing and it makes me feel good for a while and I should keep doing it? It's like working out, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to work out every day, otherwise it doesn't really work, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that there's probably something going on. So like psoas is a great example. People want to stretch their hip flexors all day long, and most likely it needs to be strengthened, or it could be a different hip flexor that needs to be stretched. So stretching that, like you have like your iliacus, which is on the inside of your hip bone. Sometimes that can cause issues, and it's not necessarily your psoas because they feed together, like kind of down in your hip. So I see him more of a problem of like overworking sometimes, whether it's for the psoas or something else.
the iliacus. Now, as you as a therapist, I see how you could very easily get to that. But I
easy.
don't, how I've seen specific tools that are set up to be able to get to that. But
Yeah.
are you familiar with any of that? That if like the psorite obviously
Yeah.
set up, there's different ones for the iliacus. Do you first
haven't
off
seen
explain where
those.
that muscle is so that all of our listeners
Yeah,
know? But do you
so-
even have a way to get to it?
So if you have your hip bone, like you have your hips are like this, your iliacus sits kind of in here on the hip, like, so it's not necessarily in your back like your psoas, but it sits on the inside of your hip bone. So if you like find the bony part of your hip and you can sink your fingers in and to the side, that's how I get to it. But I haven't seen I've seen the psorite and stuff, but I don't think I've seen any tools for the iliacus. I feel like it's a
couple of tools where you'll kind of get off to the side and press on it, and then it torques you into it, and it's a very hammer-looking thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you'd had any experience with that.
I haven't.
Do you
no.
see
Sounds
the
painful.
iliacus as an offender? That's pretty common when it comes to hip flexion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd
more
say
males
more common.
or more females, or does it? There's no
It
difference?
doesn't really discriminate.
Okay,
Yeah.
about the same all the way
Yeah.
around. What do you just? Is it purely touch manual therapy to something like that?
I do personally.
Okay.
I usually tell my clients that they can do kind of the same thing. You just find your bony hip part and then just push in, and then that way they can also like. I like to have them self-release instead of like stretch if possible, or even use a foam roller or a lacrosse ball, because they can kind of, when you touch the certain thing that you need to release, it also helps bring like awareness to your body, which I feel like a lot of people don't have in general.
How would that protocol look? So if you had, let's say, a hip flexor, let's say psoas, like what would you have them do?
So it would depend on if it was underworking or overworking.
Okay.
So like most of the time it's underworking. So if I found like, let's say I don't know, your iliacus was overworking for the psoas in the hip flexion, like you were having issues with hip flexion or extension or whatever.
Yeah.
So the iliacus, we would calm him down, and I would be like, hey, like make sure that you're actually like pushing in towards your hip bone and not just straight down. And you know, you have to kind of get specific with people. So I would just be like, you know, make sure that you're pushing into like whatever comfort level for you, and then do that for like 1 to 2 minutes or like however long you feel, until it kind of relaxes, until you feel like the intensity of that is not as prominent. And then you would do an activation for the psoas. So easiest one is like if you plant your leg, if you're like laying down, plant your leg like this, and then you pull kind of like up and across, because that's how
Okay.
the fibers run. So I also try to tell that too, of like, hey, make sure that we're going in the direction of the fiber so that we can make sure that you're actually using that muscle and not something else.
Okay.
That one's super easy, and most people don't ever do that unless they're, you know, actually training their hip flexors. So
What do you think is causing like a lot of issues with hip flexors? So as
sitting all day, every day for 8 hours, 9, 10 hours, all day, every day, and then coming home and sitting on the couch and watching TV and going like this on your phone and typing like this on your computer.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest one, or driving a lot, or just any type where you're in a hip flex position all day long. I feel like we don't ever sit all the time, so
Yeah.
we don't ever really have those issues, but our desk workers are usually the big ones, or those are the main ones, or driving, people who drive a lot.
So that's maybe a behavior outside of the gym. Is there
Yeah.
one that's in the gym that you see that's like, I wish people would do less of X, or I wish people would do more of, and just as a general rule, just from what you see, you know, like maybe toned out traps are always on. I wish people would do this, or I wish people would pull twice as much as they push. Is there anything like that you see?
A generalization, probably not. I don't think so. Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Is there a recommendation you give for sitting? Like, hey, man, it's cool if you sit 30 minutes, but for every 5, you need to get up? Or is there anything like that you try to offer up?
I try to tell people to, like, do whatever they can. Because some people, you know, you try to tell them to do that. They're like, I literally have projects to work on, or, like, I'm in meetings all day long.
do you suggest like stand-up desk?
Yeah, I mean, if it's possible. Some people just can't. I always try to, like, take whatever recommendation and think about the person who literally would be like, no. To everything that you say, be like, no. So I try to make it, like, as simple as possible, because you'll have those people. You'll have those people that literally will be like, okay, can you stand up for 5 minutes? They're like, no. Can you stand up for a minute? They're like, maybe. What about 30 seconds? Can you just walk around your desk for, like, 2 times? And then they're like, okay, cool. And I always just think about it, like, you'll have those clients who
Sure. Very smart.
who literally will, like, just either not do it or can't do it.
Yeah.
So you have to, like, bring it down until you know, the next time you see them, they're
Then you
like,
can kind of build from there.
yeah, 100%. I was talking with one of my clients about this from, like, a training perspective of, like, I remember one of my clients when I was here training, she was this person who had never trained a day in her life and was, like, you know, very severely overweight. So we would take, like, the most basic exercise, like a body weight squat, and it was like she couldn't do that. So how can you regress that? How can you regress that further? How can you regress that further? And whatever that starting point is with every client, then you can build on from that. So, like, I do the same thing even with my massage clients of, like, oh, you can't bring your arm past, like, here, then let's start here. What about here? What about here?
So you're setting up intentional milestones that we can target. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, 100%. Even in a treatment perspective.